What the fuck is this?
Ici Londres. Veuillez écouter maintenant quelques messages personnels.
You know what I say to people who don't like Orphée? Try harder. Leslie Halliwell loved Orphée. Leslie Halliwell basically liked nothing made after talkies were invented. John fucking Simon loved Orphée. The bitchiest critic in the history of bitching. In fact, he was offended that Jean-Luc Godard used the radio codes from Orpheus in Alphaville. By the way, Simon spent more of his time in print trashing Godard than any other public figure, and often pointed to Cocteau as the anti-Godard. And I quote, Godard's poetry consists of things such as a character saying, I believe in the immediate inspirations of my consciousness, a line which, if it were in a film by Cocteau, would be followed by a beautiful image. In a film by Godard, it is followed by another line. True story. When Godard won the New York Film Critics Circle Award for Goodbye to Language in 2014, I posted a joke about John Simon, who was a member of the New York Film Critics Circle, rolling in his grave. I said I knew he was still alive. Simon was still probably only like 165 years old at that point, but I assumed he slept in a coffin like all good vampires. And then John Simon himself replied to my post.
What did he say?
3 words. In the nude. So here's the try harder challenge. If John fucking Simon, the man who literally rose naked from a coffin to spit on Jean-Luc Godard's legacy, could still find the technical rigor to respect Cocteau, what's your excuse? If the world's most hostile critic didn't find Cocteau too much, it's because he understood the magic of cinema. You are just not trying hard enough to see it.
I'm going to blame my autism. I'm sorry. I'm a very take things literally person, so it's not that I'm not trying, it's that my brain doesn't work that way.
What the fuck?
That came out of my mouth.
But I
certainly
don't
watching
words,
somebody.
so I prefer to sigh.
I said that many times as well. That was just so much like, yeah.
For the first one.
I did it for the first one and the third one. The second one, not so much, but yeah. Also, is that BoJack Horseman?
BoJack Horseman. That totally happened to me, but nice. It's also guys in the club.
Yes.
It's furries. No, there's some pony play going on there. Let's go.
Hello. I'm Mr. Red.
Hello, BBC. This is Ian Wilson. The Americans are over the Rhine. Supreme Headquarters announced a few minutes ago that General Hodges' First United States Army has crossed the Rhine. Elements reached the Rhine and crossed to establish a bridgehead on the east bank, somewhere south of the
I'm Jennifer Trujillo.
I'm Erin Brown.
I'm Sila Blume.
I'm Eric Trommater, and this is World Cinema History. Are we reaching? Jean Cocteau was a poet, a playwright, a sculptor, a painter, and a filmmaker so iconic to the middle decades of the 20th century that it's impossible to imagine that period without him. His vision was so integrated into the core of Western life that a decade later, Disney's Beauty and the Beast had no choice but to animate in the style of Cocteau's 1946 film, down to the Baroque design of the castle, because to so many, it was the only version of the Beauty and the Beast story they knew. But there's a technical divergence you have to see. In the Disney version, the objects are cute, singing characters. In Cocteau's 1946 film, the hallway is lined with actual human arms protruding from the walls to hold the candles. It is the mechanical reality. It is far more unsettling than a singing teapot. Yet Cocteau is an odd candidate for icon status. Openly queer and openly struggling with an addiction to opium, his brand of surrealism was so weird that André Breton, the leader of the Surrealists, moved to distance the movement from him. And when you're too weird for the Surrealists, you are truly weird. This week we explore a trilogy he made over 30 years. Blood of a Poet, 1930, Orpheus, 1950, and The Testament of Orpheus, 1960. The trilogy asks the question, what is art? Why is art made? And who is art made for? Spoiler, the answer to the latter turns out to be Cocteau himself. So grab your secret decoder rings, kids. It's time to get to work. All right, let's open up. We're going to look at Blood of a Poet from 1930. Sila, I don't think you'll be surprised to learn it was financed by the Viscount and Viscountess de Noailles, the same couple that financed L'Âge d'Or. Did you see a certain familiarity between the images here and Buñuel's L'Âge d'Or and Buñuel and Dali's En Chien Andalou?
I don't want to connect that with the funds of one person or one group of people helping two different artists. I think, like in many situations, there are signs of the times. That could be a sentiment connected to war. That could be a lot of things. But, of course, there's a very, very strong connection on many levels, rooted in what we know as surrealism. The language, the way of cutting, the editing style, the angles, the playfulness with gravity, namely the effort to get rid of gravity for the naked eyes. But I think there's a connection to what we experience around the world right now, the difficulty digesting whichever event is happening around the corner from us, be it in India or in China or in the United States or in Iran. There are certain things happening right now. It doesn't matter from which side we look at it, we're dealing with the same problems. And I think that language has a lot to do with the necessity of the time.
Now, André Breton certainly saw familiarity, and he actually lobbied to keep Blood of a Poet from being released because he thought that it was too imitative of L'Âge d'Or, but especially En Chien Andalou. Breton also just hated Cocteau. He considered him a interloper, a posh kind of slumming fellow who used opium instead of automatic writing to kind of unlock the unconscious. He looked at Cocteau's technique as being kind of a shortcut, and where we can look at these images and definitely see that they have their center in early Dadaism and early Surrealism. All Breton saw was weirdness for the sake of weirdness. That doesn't mean I agree with Breton, and it's an interesting coincidence that this week's filmmaker Cocteau and then the writer of next week's screenplay for Children of Paradise, Jacques Prévert, were both people who Breton kicked out of the Surrealist movement. It seemed like the best way to make memorable cinema in the 1930s and 40s was to flunk out of the Surrealist movement.
I'll just give the examples of Pablo Picasso, Buñuel, and Salvador Dalí. What they are experiencing, like I said before, might be the same war or the same conflict or the same school or the same opera singer, but their intentionalities are going to be extremely different even without them knowing that themselves. So when Breton takes the audacity to claim to have the right to kick someone out, there are certain things that, in my opinion, he was unable to see because he did not like something about Cocteau, and not necessarily because he was doing something wrong. Again, what Dalí is putting on the canvas has a lot to do with Gala, has a lot to do with his penis, has a lot to do with his childhood, has a lot to do with the drugs he has taken or the drugs he has not taken, has a lot to do with his contemplation of being homosexual with Lorca. To have a friendship with him, but knowing that he doesn't want to or he cannot allow himself to be seduced by Lorca. There is so much complexity in whatever a person does. It doesn't matter who all these people are. To come up to the symbolic of surrealism,
Can I interrupt for just a second, Sila, and draw this to this trilogy? Isn't that the great line of the Testament of Orpheus when he says that every artist can only create a self-portrait?
Yes, of course. But the other side of that is that we are unable, and maybe that's a good thing, to really see how we are reading the same piece, or we are unable to ever agree that when we look at the green light or the traffic light, the way you look at the yellow and the way I look at the yellow, we are looking at two different things, even though we both call it yellow. But they're two different things, but we can never agree as to what we are individually looking at. We just call it yellow. But we're not considering that we are seeing different things.
And in Cocteau's case, I think that's a very good thing for us because Cocteau's brain seems to me like a place I would not want to hang out.
Yes. And I think we have to accept the fact that we cannot read and we're not supposed to read what anybody else is reading. That's just the way it is.
So let's look at the technical rigor of this film. Georges Peyronel was the cinematographer. And to create the effects in this, he's bouncing raw arc lamps off of white plaster to create this kind of shadowless void of this film, which many of the cast suffered from what was called Klieg eye and radiation burns because these uncovered Klieg lights were producing indoors the power of the sun. Jennifer, I'm going to turn to you. Does the physical pain of the production, that clinical white light, come through on the screen? And does it change how we read the poet's internal struggle, or is it just kind of a high-fashion artifice to you while you're watching?
I saw the contrast of the brights and the light, and it was uncomfortable, but I was also uncomfortable with figuring out the weirdness and the pacing and the images and what was happening. So I think it added to my discomfort. It didn't burn my eyes watching it for sure, thankfully.
Well, luckily you weren't on set.
If I'd known, I'd put on my leather slit glasses for snow blindness. But yeah, that's terrible. But people got hurt for the art. It happens, I guess.
But it's a very dramatic look. And to Sila's point, it's very Art Deco, the shadowlessness of it, and the overlighting, and then he actually pushed the contrast in post-production. So when they developed the negative on this was shot on silver nitrate film, it really brought the silver out. And so the whites are extraordinarily white, and the blacks are extraordinarily black. And to add to that, you have almost all of people in this wearing pancake white makeup to make their features kind of blend into this white plaster of surrounding. It looks Art Deco.
The Fluxus movement was a little bit later. Both Fluxus and Dada movements were not only being creative and using weirdness as one of the things. This weirdness had a lot to do, again, to my point earlier, had a lot to do with their determination to criticize the niceness of the arts. And we are going to do weird things not because we are weird, but because we reject doing normal flowers. We want to question and challenge reality. So a lot of this stuff is not just about them being creative, but about them criticizing what we in their times call creativity.
Moving on, the signal shifts, the mouth moves to a statue and commands the poet to go through the mirror. Erin, looking at a technical note, this was not a jump cut. Cocteau actually laid a pool of water on the floor and mounted a camera directly above it. The poet dives into the floor, but we're seeing him walk through the mirror. Then the film is rotated and reality breaks. What is the mechanical reality of this choice? By crawling across a floor that we are told is a wall, what is Cocteau telling us about the effort required to enter his mythological zone? I chose you for this one, Erin, because I thought you'd appreciate the whole way of defeating gravity by actually having him crawl on a floor that's got painted doors on it and all of that.
I thought that was interesting. It made it look very unreal, while also keeping the effect he was going for and making that work. Because how else is he going to put somebody through a mirror without breaking it? The image of the mirror being water and him going through it actually, I thought, was really effective for what he was going for. And he kept the weird, it's supposed to be a wall, but it's really the floor, but he's crawling like it's the wall. He kept that going for all of the weird little bits where he was looking through the peepholes. That when he was going across that hallway, it was just very surreal and odd. And, gravity doesn't make sense because this world doesn't make sense. That's how it felt to me.
The imagery of the scene of the hallway with the peepholes came straight from that Japanese movie about death. It's that same image of that hallway when they went to that on the vacation, the parents. Same angle, same look, same stuff. I thought it was bizarre and interesting. Sorry. And
another sign of just how incredibly influential Cocteau was in his day.
Oh, yeah, maybe. I don't know. I thought it came right from
all the way to Japan.
Yeah. And I love the water in the mirror. Everything he did with all of the mirrors through those films, I loved. That was my favorite part, hands down. Hands through.
Are the mirrors telling us different things in each of these films? Cocteau said that the mirror is where you watch yourself die, because of course every time you look in the mirror, you're slightly older. There is something interesting in this early version of the mirror. The mirror is taking the poet, but the poet is becoming nothing more than a peeping Tom, and he's peeking into other people's lives. As we move on, Cocteau makes us the spectator, and we are the ones who are peeping in on his life. Did you see, by watching this film first and then the other two films in the series, an evolution of what the mirror meant to Cocteau?
I do not want to comment on the connection of what it means to him by putting it in that particular way in three films. I think because a lot of it is going around the transcendental or poetic being of the poet, and including death, and death being a very important topic. We always understand dying or the transition from life to death as going through a certain frontier. There's a borderline. There's something to cross when you are born or when you die. I think most humans prefer not to see the transition. Most humans, I would say, they prefer to die in their sleep. They don't want to deal with it. And by using the mirror, you are confronted to be very conscientious about that process of dying.
I mean, I think you said the seeing yourself in the mirror, and as you age every day and as you continue to age, facing your mortality. I mean, I always remember my grandfather saying at some point in his life, he just one day you look in the mirror and you're like, who's this old person looking back at me? Like, who's that guy? Or who's that human? I thought it's not just the death, because it's like the passage to the other world and back. Because, Orpheus was able to go many of them were able to go back and forth through the mirrors and transition from one plane to the other. In the Orpheus film, I think that the death was the princess of death, right? That these people, images that made
she is Orpheus' personal death.
Yeah. So she is the bringing of his death and the facing of his death, more than just the mirror. Visually, I just thought it was incredibly cool to watch going through the mirror in each of the films, like the overhead shot in the first one and going through the mirror and back. And then in the second one, the way that the mirror was solid and then through the mirror. And then when they went on the other side, seeing them through the haze of the mirror, I just thought that was incredibly cool and cleverly, an incredible practical effect of a very magical, I want to say surrealism. I thought it was just visually very entertaining and just made me think, of all the things with the boats going through the path of hell and back. I mean, just a way of the transition. I thought it was a cool part of that, but I didn't think of it as so finite when that was happening. I thought of it as sort of that pathway of traversing the worlds, which happens through Roman and Greek mythology, like in these other stories of being able to, some creatures and some people going back and forth, which does happen in some of these, right? In this film.
I think they evolved as his filmmaking evolved. But I don't think the meaning of the mirrors really changed all that much, because mirrors have always been used symbolically. I mean, with like Alice Through the Looking Glass, things like that. And people, there are cultural traditions where, like, if someone dies, you cover your mirror because you don't want to allow their spirit to come back through. And I mean, mirrors are, I hope I'm not the only one who thinks mirrors are a little creepy, especially at night. Because I mean, even with like kids saying, doing Bloody Mary in front of the mirror, you light a candle, you say Bloody Mary 3 times and she's supposed to appear. We've got this, just as humans, this weird idea of mirrors, because they look like they're showing the world, but it's just a bit different. It's backwards from what you're used to seeing. And that can be really creepy. Like, imagine if you were looking in the mirror and all of a sudden your reflection did something different from what you were doing. That would be really unsettling. And they've done that in other movies and things like that. In fact, there's a book that I really like called Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, where one of the characters uses mirrors to travel around. There's a whole world behind the mirrors that you can't see. And so I think using mirrors as a portal to another place is really something that is easy to understand for a lot of people.
Now, on a technical note, this is something we talk about quite a bit. Cocteau, in order to give us these mirrors and this hallway, is using depth of field. Does not blur anything. There is nothing out of focus in this. And this goes back to that bouncing the Klieg lights off of the plaster. This requires a ton of light because they're shooting with f-stops as high as f11 in order to gain this absolute depth of field. It's a vertical nightmare, to Erin's point, because of course everything is painted on the floor, the actors are crawling on the floor, and Cocteau is shooting from above. What is this deep focus telling us, this lack of blur that doesn't allow the poet to hide anything? Because it's something that you see throughout all 3 films, especially it becomes noticeable in Testament of Orpheus, where he's shooting on a lesser film stock, the depth of field shows everything.
In terms of the mirror as such is a very modern thing, namely the technological advances to be able to make an intentional reflection. But the idea of reflection is in nature for a lot longer than we have mirrors. And the reflection has always been there. When we see the shadow, our own shadow is always, in my opinion, a form of allowing us to recognize reality in ourselves. The aspect of death and going through mirrors is awakening us to life and death. And to your point, or to your question, I think the fact that in this trilogy, I find him to be accentuating both sides of the mirror as important. Death as life and the transition. All 3 are equally important. By using that depth of field like that, everything is being presented as important. Every layer is important.
Yeah, he's giving equal weight to all three layers of the universe.
I feel I would echo Sila's sentiment that I felt the same thing, that sort of balancing of all of it, and that it's an open passageway with the equal weight and open view. Like, I already thought it was cool when they passed through. Like, I just really love the moment in Orpheus when they pass through and then that backlit of them walking. Like, it just technically, it just kicked it up a whole nother notch of pulling me into that journey, and just was really cool. That, that POV that were right there behind him.
As somebody who watches a lot of independent film, was the fact that Cocteau was able to make all three of these films on a combined budget that was less than the catering budget for a Hollywood film at the time, something that appealed to you. That he's just using these simple camera tricks to pull off this kind of magic.
I was going to ask you the question of some of them. I'm like, are these all actually practical effects with lighting? Was any of his effects done with any of the sort of exposing the film or lighting on the film afterwards, or drawing on the film, or layering of the film?
He couldn't afford to even do that. He wanted to use double exposure for the mirror, but he ended up using mercury in Orpheus in the second film.
So he wasn't a rich.
Oh, he was extremely rich, but he wasn't going to spend that kind of money on a film. He was rich, but he wasn't. I can just throw away $1 million to make a movie rich.
I mean, I got the impression from looking at the stuff, like from the first film into the second, that the first one definitely feels like experimenting and playing with film as another medium in his world. So trying things. I mean, all sorts of things throughout the films, clever things of the changing of gravity with perspectives or moving, or somebody falling or like all the reverse imagery. Like I love how much he reversed the film. It looked like to me, like pulling the gloves off and on, and then throwing the gloves to the guy, and the guy throwing the gloves back, or so many scenes where
I did that same trick for my first film in college. I had an old Bolex camera. I turned the camera upside down. I shot on reversal film, right?
Yeah.
I had the actors walking backwards, and I had at one point somebody jumps, and in the film it looks like he's jumping into a tree, and I filmed him jumping out of a tree. The camera's upside down, so if I flip the footage and project it, it looks like everything is going forward, but it's backward motion. So everybody who is walking backward looks like they're walking forward, and that's how he did it.
Had you seen this film, and did that influence your filmmaking?
Of course.
Or did you come to that?
Oh, okay. Of course. No, of course. My first.
I don't know. Of course.
All of my films were influenced by Cocteau when I was a young and pretentious college student.
When and why did you first see these films, Eric?
I saw them in high school. Blood of a Poet was the last one that I saw, and I saw it the same way that I saw a lot of the harder to find films. We rented a 16 millimeter print of it and ran it through a moviola. It didn't have subtitles, but that didn't matter because, I mean, the dialogue isn't the point. But all three of them that were in high school, and as a kid of two kind of pseudo-intellectual parents, we had watched his Beauty and the Beast even when I was a rather small child, because my mother thought it was a way to teach us French. And so the Beauty and the Beast imagery was something that I carried with me about Cocteau since before, probably since 9 years old. I first started getting into Cocteau, ironically not through his poetry, even though that's kind of what he wanted to be known for, but through his murals. I was at a art exhibition in middle school, actually, and they had a Cocteau section where they had actually shipped murals that he had painted. They had chiseled them out of the wall and were sending them to museums. There was just something that spoke to me about the way that he drew eyes and he drew ears, and then would use the plaster, because he would paint them on wet plaster, fill in the drawing with the wet paint, and then he would paint over it again. And there was something that just really appealed to me about that technique, because it was both extremely simple and also because he used that 3-layer production, very, very, very complex. So yeah, so I had been interested in Cocteau since middle school. And then in high school, I just went to my local video store and rented Orpheus. Then one day, kind of going through a book of film criticism, seeing Cocteau's Orpheus as being named as part of a trilogy, I was like, well, the completist in me said, well, I have to see the rest of them.
Wow, you're pretty ingrained in there for sure.
That explains a lot.
It does. Did seeing the film
But I never tried opium.
Thankfully so, let's say. Seeing the film on a moviola, would they allow a light that came in versus watching it in the other formats? Did it change?
But on the moviola, there's kind of a halotation, a glow that silver nitrate gives that you can see, because the light is you are actually watching the light go through a piece of
and
film,
dance,
which is something in video you don't get quite as much. Because, of course, it's transferred into just dots, And one of my disappointments when watching the version that we watched, The Blood of the Poet, or even the free one on YouTube, which I used to rewatch this last night, is the kind of over-restoration that they did of the original print takes a bit of the magic out. So, for instance, when he goes through the mirror, you see the splash of the water. Well, you didn't see that when you were watching it projected on a screen, or I was watching it on the moviola, because that is something when they restored the negative and transferred it to digital, it kind of bled into the scene because of the silver nitrate film. The whiteness just kind of absorbed it, so you didn't see it. You didn't see a splash line around the water, so it literally looked like he was going into a mirror. It didn't look like a guy walking into water the way it does in these restorations. And that's
even
one
in
of
the splash
hundreds of
one from
examples.
The top one. Yeah, and then they brought up the contrast lines all the way around and darkened it, sort of, right? The water part in the splashing.
Right, and when
it
you do that, it looks like it takes a little bit of the magic away because you see the trick.
I can see that. Yeah, I figured that. That's why I was asking. Okay, I mean, it still looked amazing.
Great question. It was. Oh, it does. Yeah. It did. I said part of my disappointment, and I should say there are also scenes in this film that look 100 times more beautiful because they restored them. So it's a give and take. For instance, the ending snowball scene, fight scene, where Cocteau overcranks the camera to make everything look like it's slow motion, but he has his actors hurrying through it so that it looks like they're at normal speed, so only the snowballs are slowing down. In the restoration, you actually can kind of see the snowballs having a kind of viscous, heavy weight, which I couldn't see on the old prints because that was just white, if that makes any sense. But because they were able to get the outlines of the snowballs, you're actually able to see that these are heavy, heavy, heavy pieces of ice and not, and Cocteau is making a point with this. You win some and you lose some with restoration.
What was the deal with the girl in the chains being whipped and then going to the sea? Is it all those things were just different bizarre things, or has there been some discussions in your many years of watching this of what the different peoples were?
Well, we're observing a poet freeing himself and finding that freedom is death. The symbols of what he sees through that window are all versions of either imprisonment or freedom. And so, for instance, and in one case, the shadow of obvious shadow of an opium pipe is Cocteau talking specifically about his own life, which is both. It freed him up, but it was but he had to get clean of it because it was diminishing his mental capacity. And that's a repeated pattern through his life where he would get himself addicted to opium again because he was using it to free his mind. But then he would have to go to a hospital somewhere for a while and get clean of it when he realized that the opium was starting to diminish his mental capacity. All of those sequences are about a poet seeking freedom and finding that to conquer death, he had to die.
And with the key word punishment in the middle.
There you go. That explains it with the kid and the whipping, and then the kid.
And the other kids after the snow fight. There's a lot of punishment going on, which is a very intense topic for me, which I don't understand. But I find that we as humans are extremely dependent on punishment.
Well, and Cocteau fetishizes that in those shots. Those are
great
fetishy-looking shots.
Great choice. Fetishism, for sure. Okay. And I don't want to take time from the middle movie because it is my favorite.
But he is deliberately making you feel uncomfortable.
I've seen a lot of fetish play imagery, and that scene that I mentioned with the girl was extended and disturbing. It only gave me a little release when they showed the kid having some freedom of making a face and, sticking their thumb out at them or whatever. But it was very disturbing for me because it was a child and non-consensual and an adult. It made me, it's partly the power play and that it's a child that really bothered me. And I was like, no. It made me very uncomfortable.
Yeah, and Cocteau wants you to be uncomfortable because the fetishization of violence is the point. Cocteau wants you to walk on that fine line of saying, am I supposed to be enjoying this? Am I enjoying this? What the fuck is wrong with me? That's what he's attempting to do. Now, we're a little more evolved than 1930s, so that part of it, the am I enjoying it part, probably didn't work on us.
I didn't know that.
Slightly, ever so slightly.
Fetishism from many perspectives. In my opinion, from my perspective, it always has a connection to suffering, and the suffering is always there to function as a punishment. Even an example that I like to give, well, I don't like to give it, but I've been giving it for quite a couple of decades already. Normally, when any person has sex, especially intercourse, the usual sounds are not those of laughing and contentment. They're more like of pain. So there's something intrinsic in humanity that connects even the word passion. Passion is actually the combination of enjoying, of being pleased through suffering. And I don't think that is a religious aspect. I think it's very cultural, very innate in us. And there's I can't remember the name of the movie.
Well, and not Western culture. The Japanese have tentacle porn. It's a human thing.
Yeah. And there's what's in the film, Bergman film, The Thing of the Wolf.
The Hour
of the Wolf. Yeah. The last time I saw it, or perhaps the first time I saw it, something hit me really, really hard. And that is where Johann, who's the main character, the main male character, he confesses to his wife that when he was a child, he did something wrong. His mother sent him to be punished. The father took him to the room. He was punished, and he was willing to be punished. And when he comes out, he says to the mother, "Will you forgive me now?" There's a strong distinction that I never considered until I saw that film, a distinction between being punished and feeling forgiven. And on the cross, Jesus is asking, is it possible that I don't have to go through this suffering? Can we just do this a little bit differently? There is something embedded in, I don't know where it comes from and why, but this punishment aspect in sex, in everything, is very present.
Well, and one of the reasons I never spanked my children was because I didn't want them to develop a fetish for it when they got older.
Oh my! Well, I was gonna let's see you enjoy
Something
that.
I didn't need to know, man.
I think that pain and suffering are part of the human condition, and yes, this punishment, forgiveness. But I think in the pain and suffering, I think it is universal that people understand. Well, no, not everybody. A lot of people understand it as part of the human condition. But I think there is only a percentage of humans that grasp that line of pain is just a more intense form of pleasure, or that
yes.
the mirror image of pain and suffering, of all the planes, of all the equality of what it brings. But the people that do, I think, have a different perspective. And
yes,
yeah.
And that makes the conversation, not ours, but that makes the general conversation amongst regular mortals very difficult because it's not recognizable in the very plain culture.
We move on to 1950 in the second film, Orpheus. Sharp-eared listeners will remember in our episode on Portrait of a Lady on Fire, we discussed how Eloise argues Orpheus made the poet's choice to preserve the memory of a love rather than a woman. Just a reminder, the Orpheus story that Cocteau is adapting here to modern times is based on the Virgil version of an ancient Greek legend about a man who goes to hell to rescue his wife, is told he cannot look back on her, and does, and returns his wife to hell. But Cocteau is looking at a Virgil edition, the part where Orpheus is afterwards torn to pieces by his followers, and his severed head floats across the sea to the Isle of Lesbos, still singing. It is the ultimate image of the artist as a disembodied signal. The man is dead, but his broadcast continues. Cocteau translates this into a scene that predates my favorite scene in Martin Scorsese's The King of Comedy.
Jerry Langford, right?
Right.
Oh, Morris, please hold on. Jerry, would you please sign my sign my magazine for me?
Yeah.
You're just wonderful. I've watched you your entire career. You're a joy to the world. Please, Morris, would you just please say something to my nephew Morris on the phone? He's in the hospital.
I'm sorry, I'm late.
You should only get cancer. I hope you get cancer. Jerry, you see such a person?
I can, I'm late.
Believe that kind of a person.
So, if we have a disagreement later on, a funny joke would be, if you disagree with me, say, you should only get cancer.
In Jerry Lewis's tone. He's a lovely human, by the way, as was his wife.
Absolutely. His movies suck.
Lovely.
Anyway, I hate Jerry Lewis. It's probably why I hate Godard so much, is because of his love of Jerry Lewis. But anyway, Orphée is mobbed for autographs by a pack of bacchanets on bicycles. It's no longer about divine inspiration. It's about the grotesque weight of celebrity. That's the reality of the situation. When the poet becomes public property, the head doesn't need to float to Lesbos to keep singing. It just needs a radio and a crowd that refuses to let him be a human being or be remembered as one. Now let's look at the signal and how it's evolved. In Cocteau's original 1926 play, Orphée gets his messages from, you guessed it, a horse.
Hello, I'm Mr. Red.
A literal horse in his living room that taps out letters with its hoofs. It's domestic, it's absurdist. But for the 1950 film, the livestock is replaced by a machine. The horse becomes a Rolls Royce. Instead of a stable, the poet is now hunched over a car radio in the backseat of a luxury vehicle, a Rolls Royce. What is Cocteau telling us by portraying Orphée as this kind of ego-driven junkie who falls in love with his own death?
I did not like his character at all.
Well, you weren't supposed to.
Much because of all of this. I mean, you nailed it. He's ego-driven. It's fascinating that he, cares originally about his wife's death and then doesn't care and then does fall in love with his own death. I felt like he was a character that he was narcissistic almost, not kind, totally self-focused, and so obliteratingly self-absorbed that he couldn't even grasp the concept of not looking at Eurydice and what that would cause, like the catastrophe that would cause.
Interesting point. Jean Marais and his ex-wife play Orpheus and Eurydice. A bit of casting that I think Cocteau did on purpose, seeing that he and John had become lovers right after the divorce.
I wanted to ask, are they confirmed lovers? I know that Cocteau is a confirmed
John
homosexual.
wrote an autobiography that was that became or parts of it were used for the Francois Truffaut film called Last Metro. If you ever want to know that story.
I thought that he adopted him, so he adopted his lover.
That was the other poet in the film. Was the one he adopted.
The guy that played Edward. Edward was the actor that played Suggestion.
Suggestion. Yeah, it was the one he adopted. That was an early version of gay marriage, where that was the only way that he could make sure that he was financially taken care of after Cocteau died.
Yes. Yeah, I know. I thought that was with Marion. I thought that was with this guy.
We do have to talk about that radio. Orphée sitting in that car, eyes glazed, scribbling down nonsense. It's the most candid depiction of addiction ever filmed. Whether Cocteau meant it as a confession of his own opium use or not, the mechanical reality is the same. Orphée has become a receiver for a signal that doesn't even belong to him. He has abandoned his wife, his unborn child, his work, and a living world for that frequency. Am I reading too deep into it to say that it's a bit like Gollum in The One Ring, or a junkie looking for his next fix?
Are you saying, is that going too far? No, I think that's exactly the way it was. Obsessive, totally obsessed with it. I don't know if anyone's ever deciphered the Morse code. I thought about taking the time to do that.
It's nonsense. I have. It's nonsense. It's just as nonsense.
I figured
it's a repetition of the things like the bird sings with its finger and the poet is a spy. And the things that you're hearing over the radio are also in Morse code.
But the whole sound and the war cyclical of it is a weird part of the imagery of it. The way it sounded like military and war radio was bizarre. But he was just like obsessive beyond belief with it. And it's haunting and annoying, I think, for audience, at least for me.
But isn't that how a junkie would react? Yeah. And isn't he, like Cocteau, using opium to try and reach some other plane? Or let's not even say drugs. Let's talk about David Lynch and his transcendental meditation. Or let's talk about Andre Breton and automatic writing. Aren't they all doing the exact same thing? Looking to find a shortcut to the subconscious so that something else can do the work for them. He's not putting the labor into being a creative writer anymore. He's allowing that code to tell him what to write.
I can see that. I also see that sometimes when you're around people who are struggling with substances, maladaptive behavior, substance use disorder, I call it like that merry-go-round of conversation, where you're past that sweet spot where they're a little opened up and loose and they're stuck on this magical repetition of whatever. They've got their greatest hits and they go through them over and over on a loop, like these loops. To me, I don't know if you know people like that, but you hear the same song and dance and the same story over and over.
We've all known people like that.
Yeah, it's maddening.
What confuses me, basically because I don't see why it is there, it seems to me that he has found a purpose for his life. He seems to find something that it is extremely existentially important. I don't understand why. I don't know if I could check that as one of these weird things that a director does that I never will be able to understand, or if there is something really to pick out.
Don't you find it ironic that the thing that he becomes obsessed with is death. So the thing that gives his life meaning is death.
Yes, but these messages are not really, if I if I saw that correctly, these messages are not connected to death.
But he thinks
They're just
they are. He thinks
they're
he's
in
listening to the underworld, the other side, transmitting to us.
because he took the car ride with death in this. For me, I went down this path of the Rolls Royce. Why this Rolls Royce? Is it just a fancy car? But I thought I'd remembered that the hood ornament
Because
was
the horse would have looked stupid.
the hood ornament is the flying lady or silver lady, but it was called the Spirit of Ecstasy. That sculpture that's on the hood ornament. So I thought there's a sort of ecstasy in the high, and that he associated it with being in the car with her. And the guy who we thought, was dead. He was in the car with someone who was dead, with this princess of death. And then he decided, I agree, that he decided in his mind that this was messages from the underworld, for sure, telling him what to create or write.
And so Sila has a point. He found something to give his life meaning, and the thing that gives his life meaning is death.
But it is the one thing we all have in common.
And I think it does give life meaning, because if we never died, what would be the point of anything that we do? It gives us it defines us. We live just for this brief amount of time, so it does make sense that he would be, he would see his life defined.
I, for one, would like to find out.
Okay.
I still abide by the notion, without putting anything against Cocteau, that there is something missing in translation. Not translation in terms of language, but in terms of what is going in his mind, what is going on in his mind, what is he trying to display as to his struggles with and without opium. There's a break between that and what I read from the dissection of a story. Because even if I think about Orpheus and the whole mythology, there are certain things that are obviously his own language, his own symbolism intertwined with Orpheus and the whole mythology. So, and even going back to other things, this obsession with the unimportance of weird sounds while his wife and his to-be child are waiting for him, I cannot. It has no explanation for me. I don't get it. I just don't get it. I think there's something missing.
Well, the fact that it's a radio signal and it's meant to mimic the BBC broadcast to the resistance during World War II, and that this is filmed in 1950, I think, and the fact that the underworld, the zone, when you get to the other side of the mirror, was all filmed in bombed out areas from the war, tells us something about what Cocteau is trying to tell us. But also, there is something about opium that allows you to think, and this is a paraphrase, I can't remember the exact quote off the top of my head from Cocteau, that the most trivial thing in the world is the most brilliant thing you ever saw. That's from his 1929 diary that he wrote while withdrawing from opium the first time. The lack of a point, Sila, is the point.
One of the things that for me also affect or intercept this possibility, or the lack of the possibility, is that he doesn't even know the driver is actually dead.
Does he not know, or is he just kind of ignoring it? Because, of course, the fact that the driver just kind of pops up every once in a while, if he wasn't so obsessed with those radio signals, don't you think he would have figured it out? I think he's oblivious as opposed to not just not knowing.
There's a very strong dynamic going on very early between the driver and his wife. And, of course, Cocteau likes to flirt a lot between bodies, independent of gender. Even his wife takes him for real. And I think he also takes him for real as a person. Please take care of my wife. I really know that many things should never be tried to be understood. And even when we try, certain things are just the concept of God is very clear that we are not supposed to know. And that's why we haven't found out. We're not supposed to know, period.
But let's talk about the tribunals. So after the liberation of Paris in 1944, the French government established the Comité National d'Aspersion, the Purge Committees, and Cocteau was hauled in front of a tribunal of his peers to answer for his behavior during the occupation. At his defense, he leaned into the performance of the distracted artist, the idea that he was a flighty, naive poet, so lost in his own zone that he couldn't possibly grasp the gravity of the Nazi presence. But the sticking point was Arno Breker. Breker was Hitler's favorite sculptor, the man responsible for all those massive hyper-masculine Aryan monuments that were built throughout all of Germany's occupied zones. And when Breker held an exhibition in occupied Paris in 1942, Cocteau didn't just attend, he wrote a glowing Salut à Arno Breker in the newspaper Commodia. Cocteau defended Breker as a fellow artist, claiming that the beauty exists above politics. But his diaries tell a much darker and deliberate story. They reveal a specific sexual and political philosophy. In those pages, Cocteau doesn't write like a victim. He writes like a choreographer. He explicitly saw himself as a top in a queer relationship of the French cultural hierarchy, and he viewed the German army as a necessary importation of obedient and disciplined bottoms. To Cocteau, Nazis weren't a political force so much as they were a neoclassical fetish made flesh, a group of men who looked good both in uniform and in stone, and who knew how to follow a script and orders. He was the intellectual master, and they were the muscle provided to keep his stage in order. He signed a deal with the devil because submission was a fundamental part of the aesthetic vision. He was also an openly queer man still writing in Paris during the occupation of the Nazis at a time when queer people were being shipped to camp. So part of it was also survival. But there is something in his diaries that does give a darker tone. He wanted a world that behaved like the ones in his film, where actors in gray uniforms were submissively locked into his gaze and his direction. Let's be honest. The queerest movie I have ever seen is Triumph of the Will. Leni Riefenstahl wasn't just filming a political rally, she was filming a high-budget neoclassical kink video. It's a 1,000-year-old fetish where the top, the director or leader, commands an army of bottoms to move in perfect geometric unison. When the resistance started blowing things up, in his diaries, Cocteau didn't see them as heroes. He saw them as, and I quote, ugly people, a messy, disorganized rabble that refused to be part of his curated power play. He didn't realize that in 1945, the only thing that counted was the dirt and the blood on the floor. He chose the monument over the human being. And once you see that top-bottom dynamic, you see it everywhere. 20 years later, Kenneth Anger's Scorpio Rising picks up the same signal. Anger reclaimed that active queerness of the Nazi aesthetic, the leather, the chrome, the strongman fetish. And once it had been safely removed from the actual horrors of the Holocaust, he could juxtapose Jesus with leather-clad bikers in Nazi regalia. He followed Cocteau's lead, stripping political logic to simply serve the libido. There's also something queer about MAGA in this way as well. That same desperate desire for a rigid, aestheticized order that demands an army of bottoms to worship a game show host in a long tie. Cocteau was just the first one to capture that specific dynamic on Silver Nitrate.
I'm absorbing and processing.
Well, while you're absorbing, if you do want a palate cleanser and you want to see a highly fictionalized retelling, I do recommend going and seeing Francois Truffaut's The Last Metro. But be warned, Truffaut performs a massive act of cultural PR. He takes Marier's muscles and gives them to Gerard Depardieu, and he turns the flamboyant, naughty Cocteau into kind of a safe, polite director who stays out of trouble. It is a beautiful film, but it's a version of history where the reality has been scrubbed. Or perhaps it was just the version Truffaut needed to tell. The real Cocteau, Truffaut, was just a benevolent old man who actually helped him finance the 400 Blows and dedicated his final film to Truffaut's French New Wave. Truffaut was maybe not interested in the moral rot of the 1940s. He was simply honoring the man who stood by him in the 1950s and perhaps gave his friend the gift of a clean record. But if you want the real unedited signal, you have to read Cocteau's diary. He didn't hide them. He allowed them to be published because he knew that confession was the only thing that is actually good for the soul. He wanted you to see the poet, warts and all, dining with the enemy at the Zone.
All the parallels you made across homosexuality through all of that and homoeroticism, I see what you're saying. I can understand the patterns and the thoughts and what you're seeing. There's Ernest Röhm. I mean, there was homosexuality was in a different place in Europe pre the Holocaust than after, right? There was a period when things were freer and gender fluidity was more open, and there were homosexuals. And I don't think they're not where we went through the backlash after, in the 50s and the 60s sort of on. And then there was the persecution of the homosexuals through the Holocaust, which was incredibly ironic that much of it was planned and organized and solidified by people who were either openly queer themselves there's Ernest Röhm, but there were others, and there's rumors of other people in the brown shirts and others. There's long-standing...
Well, because it's not about sexuality, it is about the sub-dom, top-bottom dynamic.
With them, you mean, or with the?
What I'm saying is it has nothing to do with homosexuality.
Yeah.
It just happened to be acted out in the homosexual world the same way it was being acted out everywhere else. Does that make sense?
It's kind of even a perversion of that fetish, because in a safe dom-sub relationship, there's consent.
The sub.
Yeah.
Well, so the sub has a ton of power.
Exactly, yeah.
All the power.
Yeah.
In some ways.
So, yeah, this is people who don't understand what that is, I think. It's people who want power over other people. And so they don't understand how humans relate to each other. They just want to have power. I think it's being conflated with the idea of the dom-sub relationship. But it's been like that forever. I mean, even in ancient Rome, it wasn't shameful for a man to have sex with another man as long as he was the top. So, and I like how it's relating to MAGA too, because like now we have in the manosphere people saying it's gay to have sex with a woman because, men are the ideal, not women. It's insane. People who want power to that degree are fucked up.
And if you have to submit yourself to a loudmouth game show host in order to fulfill your political agenda, and your political agenda is about the dominance of one group over another, isn't that also the abuse just repeating itself from one generation to the next in a way?
Definitely. They're taking their cues from the guy on the top, even though he's monstrous, and they're agreeing with them.
Well, and to use a very nasty example, as most pedophiles were molested as children and are carrying it on, it's an eternal cycle. Mm-hmm. And until we break that cycle, it doesn't end. And it has nothing to do with sex. It's about politics.
It's all power.
It's about power.
Yeah, unlimited power brings out the worst in everybody. So, and we're seeing that play out right now. And we've seen it play out over and over and over and over again. And the parallels that we're seeing now from the 40s, it's, we have brown shirts. We call them ICE, but that's what they are. We very strictly defining gender roles. We're saying people...
But let's draw this back into Orpheus for a minute.
Okay.
So in Orpheus, this seems to be Cocteau's defense, that he was too much in the zone, that he was too addicted to transmitting those signals to notice what was going on around him. by the time we read his diaries, which weren't published until 20 years later, we realize that it was more about protecting his lifestyle and a fetishization, for lack of a better word, of this kind of machismo. And isn't that Cocteau's confusion that when he saw an Arno Brecker statue, what he saw was, to his queer eye, an extremely attractive male figure made sexualized, and he did not see the evil that Brecker was attempting to impose by using these as symbols of how everyone should become bottoms or subs to an evil regime.
I don't think the sexuality was the problem. I think he,
I think he
anybody can be
mistook
an asshole.
it.
Anybody
I think
can be
he
an asshole.
mistook it. I don't think Cocteau was an asshole. I think he mistook it for sexuality.
Yeah, and that's problematic. Like, anybody can be problematic, I think, and that's definitely, if he was willing to ignore all the evil that was happening because he saw this as fitting into his lifestyle, I think that's extremely problematic. I didn't know any of that about him, so now I'm like, I need to learn more about him so I don't hate him as much as I do right in this very moment, because damn.
Well, here's that's the point of the Testament of Orpheus, isn't it? It's him admitting that he hates himself for it.
I had no idea what that was about.
Say to the tribunal all he wants. Well, I was just too stoned the entire time, and I'm just a naive. I don't know anything about politics. Blah 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 blah. By the time he's 70 years old and he's making the Testament of Orpheus, it has to actually grapple with this, and that's also why he allowed those diaries to be published, so that people would know this side of him, because he realized it was important that others don't go through it in the future.
That's good.
Yes,
I hope people learned.
It was an awful period of his life. But here's my question for the panel: if MAGA did turn into Nazi Germany and we did have to go through an occupation, how many people do you know who would join the resistance and join the underground? And how many people that you know might just say Donald Trump was a really good game show host or something to that effect, just to get along, to go along in such a society, knowing that not doing so meant death?
First of all, I'm going to say I don't know if it's an if as much as it's a when. And secondly,
exactly. First they came for, then
I'm
they
being
came
very
for.
hopeful.
We're there.
I'm being very hopeful here. I'm being hopeful here.
I know. I don't want to name any names, but I know several people that would join the resistance and several people that would just go along to go along. And I can't hate those people because they're my friends, but I would also try to sway them, as I've been trying to do since, 2016. Trying to say, this is the bad guy here. We need to not elect this guy. So, yeah, I mean, I have a very black and white view of the world. So it's hard for me to give people leeway. But there are people I love that I would have to give leeway.
Let's grade up a little. Let's grade up a little, shall we?
Okay.
John Maria, Cocteau's lover during the war and during this period, who plays Orpheus in this film, was, after 1944, one of the heroes of the resistance, an actor who went to actually drive tanks and run gasoline back and forth and put his life on the line for the resistance.
That's badass.
The same resistance that his own lover and mentor, Cocteau, saw as ugly and undisciplined.
That's badass. Also, it's pronounced Marais.
I'm feeling like I'm getting a little lost on things. I'm going to back up. Let's go back to the Arno Brecker sculptures. You're saying that people criticize Cocteau because he praised them and praised him as a sculptor. Did that happen, or did I get confused on that?
Yeah, no, that's exactly what it was. And he was found innocent. And he was found innocent because that was all the evidence they had. Because, of course, they didn't have access to his diaries. But then again,
the sculptures,
nothing in his diaries was illegal either.
They look like, have you looked at images of some of the sculptures? They're like...
Oh, they're terrible.
Well, I don't know about... they're male forms, and a handful of them look like...
They're the queerest goddamn thing you ever saw in your whole life.
Well, they're queer, and they also, some of them literally look like Murray. I guess I said his name wrong, but he looks like him. Like, looks like he was posed for them. And they're very homoerotic and nude males and all of that. So
Yeah, so is it any wonder that somebody like Cocteau was like, yeah, or hubba hubba?
right. And then, yeah, okay. So that was what was criticized. And then people got on him for that. But because he was praising part of the Nazi propaganda. Is that what I'm understanding? Or part of their movement?
Well, there's also the fact that he didn't take part in any parts of the resistance, that he stayed in Paris, that he didn't leave. He was a person who was well known, who didn't use his voice to say anything about the occupation. And the one time he had a chance to write about the occupation, it was positive. But again, none of these are crimes. None of this is collaboration. But there was some collaboration that you find in his diaries. He's got repeated lunch dates with Nazi officers. And he's bragging about being able to eat at these restaurants while the rest of Paris is starving. And these stupid Nazis not realizing that they were keeping him within, keeping him in the lifestyle in which he wanted to stay accustomed.
Was he friends with Ernest Röhm?
No. No, and they wouldn't have gotten along. They were, Rome would have had nothing to do with a surrealist arty poet, like.
No, I just didn't know.
Rome liked the rough boys.
If he was one of those people that were mentioned, but he got executed once. Much like many people in this power do.
Knives.
Right, but when I'm done with you, you've done what I need for you, and out you go. And
yeah, but I don't think Röhm was executed for his homosexuality, because so many homosexual Nazis stayed in power afterwards.
Still stayed, right?
He was executed because he had, like all of the victims of the Night of the Long Knives, he had outlived his usefulness. Once they had achieved power, they couldn't have this madman going around the streets busting people's heads in the open. It just was bad press. And so I think that's when he was executed. The homosexuality was just the excuse that they used at the time. Not to say I don't think that Hitler was at all homophobic, because nobody does to human beings what he did without having some kind of hatred for them. But I do think that he was tolerant of it within its own ranks, as long as they were masculine and ideal in masculinity. It was effeminacy.
Right. I mean, there are rumors of his homophobia being internalized homophobia. But who knows? I don't know. I mean, I've heard people talk about that, and I don't know if that's...
There was something about the German idea that the effeminate homosexual was offensive because it attracted people who would have been heterosexual to homosexuality, because they looked like women to them. There was that kind of theory that went on at the time. So, I mean, it's...
History is repeating itself.
It's about
It is repeating itself. It's about power.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's all about power.
And it's power and,
and
too much power and too much money.
Enforcing the gender roles as much is about power over women. That's what we're seeing. It's like you have to be a certain kind of person to really count, and that hurts everybody. And it's infuriating. I mean, look at what they're doing in Kansas right now. That affects people I'm close to,
Yeah.
It's horrific. And they want to do the same thing in Missouri, and it's happening, and we have to fight it,
Missouri, and someone said Idaho or Iowa is going after it. We can't go down there. But yes, it is about power, and there are cycles and patterns we're seeing.
It's closer to home in Missouri, because that's where she lives.
Yeah, I live in Missouri, and
and
I got friends in Kansas, and it's horrific to watch what's happening right now. And
let's move on to the last of the trilogy, the end of the road. If Orpheus is Cocteau's defense, the Testament of Orpheus is his confession. The film contains the line we referred to earlier, the artist can only create a self-portrait. But let's take a moment and look at the technical and sensory collapse. Orpheus in 1950 was the last gasp of silver nitrate film stock. Nitrate had a very high silver density that created that natural polishing, that ghostly glow. By 1960, nitrate had been replaced by a more clinical safety stock. Now, the kids of the new wave were hacking this new medium with higher speed still film, which gave less depth of field, but Cocteau was staging a silent protest. He stuck to his deep focus mandate on the stock with no soul to hide the artifice. The look of this film is completely different from the other two because while he's still using that deep focus technology, he's shooting on stock that looks muddier and browner. So the zone, which glimmers in the first two films, becomes a very dull and bureaucratic place. And I think that's perfect for the film because the zone has changed just as the tribunals have changed. You see this as a film almost about a tribunal. There was the tribunal in the first film, the driver, I can't pronounce his name, Alibu, whatever his name is, and the princess are sentenced for collaboration. In Testament of Orpheus, it turns out their sentence is to become judges, to judge others. Just like when the resistance took over the government, the victims had become the victimizers, creating their own tribunals. Also, an irony, at the time that Testament of Orpheus was being filmed, France, under the regime of the resistance fighters, was fighting their own version of the resistance in Algeria and in Asia.
It's a bit late, but it's the name is Ertebis.
I thought you were going to say it's a bit late. Like when you face your mortality, the closer you get to it, the more you start making amends.
That's true,
pleading
too.
guilty, accepting accountability, as you know that death, and even if whatever you believe about what happens when you go through the mirror or beyond, or whatever you believe, whether it's an afterlife or not, or morality, you go to those things. I feel like he was confessing lots of things through the entirety of the testimony, that final film.
Yeah. Especially since he said it was going to be his last film, and then he died like 3 years later. But yeah, I think you're right there.
Well, he was 70 years old, so fair dues.
He died at like 73 or 74, and he probably made it at, I think he's 68 probably, or 69 when they filmed it. I figured that out when I was like, oh, this is him in his own film. How old is he?
Chain smoked his entire life, never could kick opium. I don't know how these rich people do it, you know? I would have, if I'd lived his lifestyle, I wouldn't have made it past 40.
There's something you said in there. There's a level of, I don't know that there are plenty of poor people that are way happier than rich people, but there is something, it's way easier and more comfortable on some level to be depressed, guilty, whatever you are, with wealth, right?
Yeah, you can afford all the comforts. You can afford better health care. You can afford, better food. You can afford the good
housing,
stuff.
Food, right?
Yeah. And poor people
even
can't,
if you're depressed or suicidal or not. But
exactly.
I've seen people on both extremes of that, but I think, it would be hard to say I want to be so depressed and suicidal while I'm also poor versus, I'm going to lie in bed in my mansion and have somebody bring me soup and bonbons. Yeah, there's that.
We haven't talked about Testament of Orpheus.
One thing I want to talk about all the way through, which I know we talked about the hand on the palm, is this whole imagery of the eyes and the way that the eyes transition and where the eyes go, and the even his own eyes being covered with eyes that are, I don't know what they were made of.
And they're very specific eyes, because that's how only Jean Cocteau drew eyes that way.
Yeah.
Like you can identify any Jean Cocteau portrait, and doesn't that go back to the idea that the artist can only create a self-portrait?
He even put the eyes up on that. There's a building in the last film that it looks like he did the mural or the sculpture. I mean, the mosaics on the building in his eyes, in those eyes. Yeah. And there's a level, I mean, I feel like there's a little bit of a level similarity to his style of painting and drawing to Picasso. I do, but.
Who appears in the film.
Yes, he does. So does Yul Brynner. I saw Yul Brynner in there.
Yeah, that was suddenly Yul Brynner appears. And then and then later I was watching, I'm like, is that fucking Picasso? I had to look it up, and sure enough, it was so weird.
Yeah. And the manager of the club in Orpheus, Jean-Pierre Melville, who you will all remember played the novelist in a cameo in Breathless, who was a director that inspired the New Wave and also directed Cocteau's play L'Enfant Terrible for the film. So,
guy that kind of looked like Alfred Hitchcock.
Kind
Heavy
of.
set.
Kind of.
Is that the same guy? I don't know who he is.
You saw him in Nouvelle Vague, the Richard Linklater's Nouvelle Vague, the guy in the cowboy hat who took Godard around his own set. That he had created his own kind of guerrilla studio. That's Jean-Pierre Melville.
But is he the guy that looks like Hitchcock that we saw? The heavy set?
He,
okay.
You saw him in Breathless. He was that sexist, obnoxious novelist that she goes to interview at the airport.
Ah.
I find the idea with the judges that is their punishment, or that is what they have to pay with, alludes to the importance of any side, meaning that life and death are just a cycle. So now, because of doing this and that, you have to be judges. So there's no real end. It's just you just fluctuate to another side or just come back, but there's no real end.
But in Orpheus, you got the idea of the zone being more than just a tribunal. We were seeing the tribunal, but that it was this kind of vast space. In Testament of Orpheus, the zone with the muddiness of the black caused by the lack of the silver nitrate, it is a gloomy tribunal, and life seems to only be a trial there, a trial that never ends. I wonder, though, if this is a way of Cocteau reflecting on his defense in Orpheus to kind of say, maybe I let myself a little off the hook. You talk about painting the eyes over his eyelid. He is blinded in that scene, and then he walks past Jean Marais, his original Orpheus, as Oedipus, freshly after blinding himself. And is this Cocteau's pleading guilty to blindness and indifference?
I mean, I can see that when you say that. Yeah. I mean, would he have he had the eyes from the very first thing, from 1930, 1932. This whole imagery with the eyes in different ways that that practical effect changed from on the statue to the coming alive to spinning in the mask. And then the ones on I thought there was some painting on the eyelids, but I feel like his were literally not just painted on the eyelid. There was paper mache, or there was texture. Paper.
But the difference is you were seeing through the eyes in the first two films. In the third film, the eyes are literally blinding him. Like you say, there's some kind of creation, not just painted on his eyelids. Literally, they are keeping him from being able to see. His own artwork is keeping him from being able to see.
Okay. Yeah, I can see that.
Now, keep in mind, these are films that have meant a lot to me since childhood. I could be wrong, but this is what I see in those films, Are there other ideas? Am I wrong? You say, no, you're full of shit, Eric, and that I'm fine with that.
I mean, I saw the eyes going all the way through, like perception of art, perception of self, looking into the other worlds, being, I mean, Orphée in the second one is pretty narcissistic and blind to people. He's only self-absorbed and self-obsessed. I mean, the eyes were an important line through his work, right? Both in films and in sketches and even in mosaics or murals that he painted. They do the whole thing. Are they the window of the soul? Are they your perception of self? Are they the perception of work? Are they the lens, right, that you would look in the mirror or to see oneself or to be seen? They always say it's like that window to the soul.
And it always comes down to seeing. The mirror you see or is a place to watch yourself die, to see. In Testament of Orpheus, the eyes are actually keeping him from being able to see. So his use of that particular metaphor has changed. In his old age, he is no longer looking at art as being something that has allowed him to see more of the world, but something that has kept him from being able to see it.
When he's walking at the end or towards the end, and he has the eyes pasted on his eyelids, at some point he says, well, he has not been saying anything. We just see him walking. And then he said, when I woke up, I was on this road. At that point, you don't see those eyes anymore. I would understand that as the art being what allows him to see when he's asleep. And when he's awake, he has his own eyes.
Would you then, to extend that metaphor, say that the tribunal in Testament of Orpheus, he was asleep during the occupation, and he's saying, I'm awake now?
Yes.
So in a way, he's still defending himself.
Basically. I mean, that's the way. I've seen the film only once, and I did not see it in the proper order.
That's a perfectly legitimate take. It doesn't have to agree with mine. You should get cancer.
It's legitimate. It's legitimate, but I know from experience that when I watch a movie the second time, I catch a lot more. And that's not to say that watching it the first time, the perception is too poor or incorrect, but it is expanding when you watch it second, third, fourth time.
And you can only watch a film for the first time once, so your first impressions are incredibly important.
Well, and then also just like gaps of, rewatching a film that you watched when you were 20, when you're 40 is like a totally different, shockingly something totally different. Or a film that you watched when you were 15 and you're going to be 56 on Tuesday. Not to say that's any of us. Right. And did you find new things? Did you see new things? Well, or are you still seeing things you've seen over decades?
20 plus viewings of this film and Orpheus, I see something new in it each and every time because I'm a different person each and every time, just as Cocteau predicted. The mirrors to me in Testament of Orpheus mean something completely different than the ones in Orpheus this time, whereas that wasn't a perception that I had before I hit ripe old age, or middle-ish age, late middle age. The mirrors in Orpheus seem to be a way of getting to the other world. By the time of Testament of Orpheus, he seems to be trapped inside the mirrors. He's unstuck in time. The poet is unstuck in time. And it, as opposed to Orpheus trying to figure out what's on the other side of the mirror because he thinks it is immortality, Cocteau in Testament of Orpheus seems to look at immortality as being a burden, something that you're trapped inside. the idea of an afterlife has become scary to him. That was a perception that I got of this film this time that I had never had before in all my 20 plus viewings of it over the years.
That kind of tracks with Orpheus in the second movie, defining his life with death. That kind of, it's a little throwback to that, I think.
And when you mean
falling in
unstuck in
love
time,
with his own death, he's falling in love with his own death because he's
That's-
glamorized it. Whereas the 70-year-old, 70-year-old Cocteau is no longer glamorizing death. He's facing it.
The closer you get to death, the more you have to face it and think about it and all that. And it can be really scary. I think that's why we have so many deathbed conversions. We get somebody that's about to die and so we're like, hey, I can guarantee you a good afterlife. And they're like, fuck it, what can it hurt now? Kind of a situation, you know?
I thought
Go
you were
ahead
gonna
and
say
take us off topic, Jennifer.
confessions and conversions on deathbeds. No, it wasn't. It was a question on the unstuck. You mean unstuck in that he was the which version of himself, the middle-aged poet that was traveling through time? You mean that way unstuck? Like traveling to the future and to the past and going in and out. I mean, it was like Christmas Carol.
Unstuck in time. He has to go find the cure to get back to his own time and finds himself in the zone.
You're saying unstuck. You mean stuck, but not. Why do you say unstuck then?
Unstuck because we are stuck in time. Time moves past us. We are stuck in time. At the beginning of the film, he is unstuck in time. He is moving through it, but not of his own volition. And he's looking for the cure for it.
It very much gave me of a Christmas Carol, that kind of similar thing, like assessing your life, evaluating your life from different perspectives and consequences, and then the different characters coming through. For me, that was something that I saw in watching it. I don't know if others did.
Only the ghost of Christmas present is a trapped in the present. Whereas Cocteau is saying he is trapped in immortality because, of course, 100 years from now, we'll still be talking about Cocteau. In a way, and at the end of the Blood of a Poet, the poet has ceased to be once he's published because he is no longer himself. He is what his readers perceive him as. And so Cocteau, at the end of his life, he is unstuck in time because he is now immortal in a way. Do you see why I love these movies so fucking much?
I'm going to just admit right now, I had no idea what was going on in the first movie or the third movie. But I think it's interesting
Does
that...
it make more sense to you now?
A bit, yeah, because somewhat. Not all of it. The tribunal thing, especially, you said that it was... Okay, so he's like confessing, but he's also defending himself. I think that he's defending himself by putting on a show of confessing what he did, but he still wants us to feel sorry for him and be okay with the things that he did. That's my takeaway right now, because I genuinely didn't know what was going on for that movie, like, at all.
Well, if he hadn't allowed his diaries to be published unedited, I would agree with you. But I think Testament of Orpheus is actually him coming to terms with the fact that this is all going to come out eventually anyway. And in a way, just stating, this is me. This is who I am. This is what I've done.
Having the body of work of his... I mean, that's not just the film. That's the film and his journals.
Yeah, but
Context.
I'm answering Erin's specific question as to what Cocteau is trying to say, as opposed to what we could perceive.
I think it's him saying, here I am, take it or leave it, and even publishing the diaries, which sounds like it happened after he died. I think he was trying to mitigate any damage by doing this, by saying, hey, here I am, this is me, have empathy for me right now, so that when you find out all the other stuff later, you'll still have this view of me. That's what it feels like to me.
And that's a legitimate way of looking at it. because he is a narcissist, but on the one hand. But on the other hand, I can't think of another poet or artist of any sort who allowed even that much of himself to be shown. Who literally, he says at one point, "Here I am, I'm stripping myself naked in front of you." And I think the Testament of Orpheus is Cocteau literally standing naked in front of you, inviting criticism on him, his work, and everything that he stands for, which I think is a brave thing to do.
In modern town, I would say Andrea Gibson did that and has done that up and through and past her death. But did he just literally, as you said at the beginning in the spoiler, like he just made this film and this trilogy of films? I mean, I don't feel like he made the whole trilogy just for himself, but I feel like the last film feels very much for himself.
I think he was his target audience. I think he made it knowing we would enjoy them.
Yeah, we could go down the, what else? Who else would enjoy it other than the moment of BoJack Horseman, which just I was glad when you said it, Erin, because I yelled it at the TV yesterday.
Nice.
I was like, BoJack Horseman.
Well, here's an interesting question: Are those are the horses the ghosts of the horse that he recast as a Rolls Royce from the play version of Orpheus to the film version, maybe?
Or is he just into horses? It could be a whole John Oliver horse situation here.
Of course.
A whole John Oliver horse? Nope. I'll have to look that up.
Do you watch Last Week Tonight?
No, not enough.
It's kind of a recurring joke that John Oliver is like disturbingly into horses. Kind of like him and Adam Driver. He was super into Adam Driver too, as a joke.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, he wants to fuck a horse is the joke. He doesn't actually, but that's the joke. I love John Oliver. He's so weird.
And while I won't go that far with Cocteau, there's horse symbolism in all of his work, but all of his work also has a ancient Greek, ancient Roman text that it builds on. And of course, they worshipped horses then because that was the same way we worship the car here in America today, or worldwide now, because that was their only form of transportation, and so, it's actually, for a man born, a full decade before the 20th century began, that probably was something rather natural, horses
are cool. Horses are just cool.
Until they bite you when you're 7 years old and make you afraid of them the rest of your life. Not that happened to me.
Right. Yeah. Not that I like horses. They're cool. I just don't know if I like horses as much as Jean Cocteau liked horses.
He does have some fetishy looking guys in horse
His
costumes.
Horse boys, yes. He had the horse boys.
Yeah. He definitely has horse boys. Well, the motorcycle boys
I don't think that was a commentary on the horses more than it was the boys.
I think the motorcycle boys that are Princess Death's escorts are also that.
Dressed,
I think they're pretty.
The little
dressed almost exactly like Nazis down to the white jackets. Yeah.
Well, and they had a corsety piece, which I thought they were badass looking, but they were definitely. I was questioning.
Well, and you can see how Cocteau might have thought that the Nazis marching in dressed like that were badass looking.
And what are you saying, Erin? You thought they were what?
Oh, I didn't know what the deal was with them. I thought I noticed the courses. I'm like, that's unusual. And I really didn't put any thought into it. I did not know that Cocteau was gay until I looked him up after watching these movies. So
you didn't know the guy who made Blood of a Poet was gay after you saw him blow himself with a mouth in his own hand?
That's true. I literally was thinking, is this guy gay or is he just French? That was my thought process. Found out it's both. But
fair enough, Erin.
I learned he was gay because you fed it to you told us in the script, and I was like, oh, new perspective, shocker.
Yeah, I did read the script.
The way they acted with it, I was like, what if not? He influenced modern pony play. Maybe, but there was pony play probably back in Roman times.
There's pony play going back to the Roman Empire.
Yeah, I don't think it's new, but he really
He may
sauced
have
it up with that.
You may be right. He may have popularized it. He popularized a lot of gay culture.
Yeah,
People that went on behind the scenes through his poetry, through his artwork, and through just kind of talking about it. You know,
and even there's a connection somewhere with Man Ray, right? Man Ray, I think.
Yeah.
Well, Man Ray's art.
Man Ray is in Blood of a Poet. So
yeah, he influenced a ton of homoerotic art and photography.
Mapplethorpe considered Man Ray the only artist worth knowing. If you want to see the people behind these films transformed back into characters, look at Richard Linklater's film Nouvelle Vague. He cast Louis Garret as Cocteau, Guillaume G as Jean-Paul Léon, Thomas Blanchard as Jean-Pierre Melville, and Jean-Charles Cliché as Jean Marais. Linklater understood that these artists succeeded in becoming immortal objects, just as Cocteau had feared. Woody Allen said, "I don't want to achieve immortality through my work. I want to achieve immortality by not dying." Cocteau realized that the immortality of art is a bureaucratic trap. The poet is unstuck in time because he is no longer a man, he is an object on a shelf. The zone is the silence that follows when the tape runs out. If you didn't get it, try harder. Next week, the road to Godard hits a bit of a pothole with the film Godard and the Cahiers du Cinema crowd called A Beautiful Corpse, 1945's Children of Paradise. Before Godard could invent the future, he had to dismantle the past, and the past didn't get any more monumental than Marcel Carné. This is a film that represents everything the New Wave wanted to set on fire. The massive sets, the theatrical dialogue, and the technical rigor of a studio system that was functioning perfectly even while the outside world was ending and people were going without food. We're going to look at why this film is considered both beautiful and a dead end by the men who would eventually create Breathless and 400 Blows. We'll also look at the mechanical reality of its production, how they built the Boulevard of Crime while France was starving, and why the lead actress, Arletty, ended up in a war prison cell after the occupation for her international art. Jennifer Trujillo, where can people find you on the internet?
For her international, what was that word? Heart? P-A-R-T?
She got thrown in prison for having an affair with a Nazi officer during the occupation, and her defense was, "My heart belongs to France, my ass belongs to the world."
Oh my goodness. Okay. You can find Gilbert Baker Film Festival.lgbt and Gilbert Baker Film Fest on Instagram. You can find a link tree with all links to all the ways Gilbert Baker Film Festival's available and reachable and things we support. And you can find me there as well. So reach out there, please. I would love to hear what people thought of these films. What did they mean to you? What did the images mean to you? What do you think about the things we brought up in this podcast? So please comment and let us know. Thanks.
Sila Blume, where can people catch up with your going-ons online?
I could be reached at silablume.life, and currently I'm doing a short series of 21 days dedicated to my father as we approach his date of birth.
Excellent. Sila, you are very good at people's birthdays. And Erin Brown, where can people find you and our podcast online?
You can find me on Blue Sky at Toad Puppy, and you can find me on YouTube at Pizza Horse Productions, and you can find this podcast at ko-fi.com/World Cinema History. Come check us out. We've got all of our old episodes up there. You can leave comments, you can leave us a tip so we can upgrade our equipment and keep the podcast ad-free, and we hope to see you there.
And you can find me on Twitter at ETROMMATER, or the artist formerly known as Twitter. Sorry, I forgot my own fucking joke. We also have a Facebook group called World Cinema History Podcast. Join us there. There's only about 70 people there right now, but it's a lot of fun. We're discussing not only the films in this series, just anything that crosses your mind. So join us there as well. I'm Eric Trommater, and thank you for listening to World Cinema History.
Can I throw in there? We have the Patreon in places where you can give both the hosts of this podcast a birthday gift and maybe some equipment to make this podcast level up. So wish them happy birthday and maybe leave them a gift. There you go.
ko-fi.com/World Cinema History.